Hello friends, my name's Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today's subject matter is Creator's Choice. Now these are the cars that I've selected, these are cars that I personally adore, dream cars, whatever you'd like to call them, that I've picked out because I like them. After weeks of throwing around the best of different eras, I've decided to just throw around 7 cars that I really like, and we start today with the Jaguar FType R, 550 horsepower, 3,638 pounds of weight. This is one of my favourite cars. I fell in love with this car in Forza Horizon 2 when it was added as DLC, because it was such a fun car to drive, it really was. And here on Forza 6, well, it's turned into a bit more of a hardcore racer. It doesn't feel nearly as slide prone as it did on Horizon 2, although in general most cars don't. The F-Type R was actually reasonably nice to drive around here, to be honest with you. You can have oversteer if you slam on the power a bit too quickly. 550 horsepower is a reasonable amount of power, so as you can imagine, getting that down to the ground through rear wheel drive can be a bit tricky at times. However, the F-Type usually deals with it. The worst spots for sort of oversteer were through Hammerhead and occasionally through the follow-through as well. But other than that, I didn't really have too many issues with the F-Type R. It was a relatively nice car to drive around here, which was kind of surprising, considering the sort of animal this car can be. It does feel a little bit weighty as well. 3,638 pounds isn't terrible, but it certainly isn't small. Next up, we have the Aston Martin Vanquish, 565 horsepower, 3,834 pounds of weight. The Aston Martin Vanquish, again, is one of my favourite cars in the world. If I won the lottery tomorrow, I would walk straight into an Aston Martin dealership and purchase one of these cars. I think it's just the most beautiful car ever made, to be perfectly honest with you. Now, the Vanquish is actually quite an interesting car to drive. We've had Aston Martins go around a couple of times here in various seasons and so on, and they've always been a little bit slow, quite heavy, and not particularly great. The Vanquish was a bit of a surprise, because this car is actually kind of nice handling. I took Hammerhead a bit wide there, which is a bit strange. But yeah, this is actually a relatively nice to drive car. It stays well planted, I would say. It is the second heaviest car here today. Oh, sorry, the first heaviest car here today that isn't a truck. We'll get onto that later. But yeah, you can feel the weight, don't get me wrong, but you can in pretty much every Aston Martin, and this one, it isn't a bad car at all. Probably the most track-orientated Aston Martin I have driven here in Forza 6. I haven't quite driven the V12 Vantage S yet, so I don't know, maybe that will be slightly nicer to drive as it was on Horizon 2. Next up we have the Ferrari 575 Maranello, 508 horsepower, 3,815 pounds. This is actually not that much lighter than the Aston, I've just realised. Anyways, I've spoke about the 575 in the past. This is my favourite Ferrari in the world. I think this is just a fantastic looking car. Probably the first Ferrari I'd end up buying. Is very close between this and the 430 Scuderia. Anyways, the 575 was, again, a very nice car to drive around here. It was very smooth. I'll say that for the 575. I was having some issues through Hammerhead. Now, the front of the car feels like it somewhat lifts up. I don't know if it's just because this car has sort of softy suspension. It feels nowhere near as bad as it did in, say, the rough CTI Yellowbird, which actually physically did raise off the ground. But it did sometimes feel like the front end was rising up, which was a bit strange, but other than that, the 575 was a very good car to drive. A little bit down on power. 508 horsepower is quite a lot, but it also weighs 3,815 pounds, which is quite a lot. So yeah, the 575, it'll be interesting to see where this car ends up, just because of the power and weight. Next up, a car that won't have to worry about that. This is the Alfa Romeo 4C, 240 horsepower, 2,500 pounds exactly. This is the lightest car we have here today, and also the second, tied for least powerful car. Anyways, the 4C is another car I very much adore. It's a little fun sports car, kind of similar to a Lotus Elise, but much better looking. I've always liked the 4C. and I was relatively interested to see how it would handle the Top Gear track. Now, it does handle quite a lot like a Lotus would, in the sense that the car occasionally does try to spin itself out, because it's mid-engined rear drive, so eventually the car will just sort of overtake the front end of it, the rear end of the car will overtake the front end, and that can mess you up a bit. But yeah, the 4C, other than that, it had great handling. It was really nice to drive. Straight line speed was reasonably decent in this car. For only having 240 horsepower, it definitely wasn't bad. I would take this over the Lotus Elise that we had go around a couple of weeks ago. Because this car sort of, it gets the balance right, you know, it has the lightweight, but it also has the power. And yeah, the 4C was pretty damn decent, to be perfectly honest with you, which was a nice surprise, and it went for a bit of a fly there. Next up, we have the Koenigsegg Agera, 940 horsepower, 3,164 pounds of weight. Now, about a week ago, I believe, I reviewed the Koenigsegg 1.1, which is basically an Agera, but super modified. And I said how lovely that car was to drive, and how in a normal Koenigsegg you'd end up in a wall, and this is what I was on about. 940 horsepower, by far the most powerful car here today, and that's also a heck of a lot of power. 940 horsepower really is a lot, and it has to put that all through the rear wheels. This does mean getting the power down is quite problematic in the Agera. Well, as in the 1.1 you could basically full throttle it after a couple of seconds. In this, you could only really get the power down in about 2 places, to be perfectly honest with you. You had to be so careful on the throttle with the Agera. But it wasn't nearly as terrible as I was expecting it to be. I sent a cone to space then. I was expecting this car to sort of be as tricky as the Hennessy Venom was in Season 2, and to be perfectly honest with you, it wasn't. We haven't had the Hennessy Venom go around in Forza 6 yet. It is something I'm looking at doing in the coming weeks. So it should be interesting to see how those two match up. Next up, we have the Volvo 850R, 240 horsepower, 3,230 pounds of weight. For those of you who know me, I am a big Volvo fan, and the 850R is probably one of my favourites. Well, I say probably, this is my favourite, I guess. This is definitely a car I'll be looking at getting in a couple of years, because I'd love a big Volvo wagon. Anyways, the 850R, the way it drove around this track was very interesting, very similar to a hot hatch. Now, the Volvo 850R is actually front-wheel drive, and 240 horsepower is a reasonable amount for a hot hatch. However, of course, this car is from 1995, so or is it 97? I'm not sure. Anyways, it's kind of an old car, so putting that power down can be a bit problematic. I do think this car definitely needs a differential in it. I will say that much. This was getting a lot of one-tyre fires going. But I mean, other than that, the 850R was reasonably good. Straight line speed isn't bad for a car of this class. Of course, it's nothing on the Koenigsegg Agera, but this has 700 horsepower less than the Agera, so what do you expect? Well, no, I really enjoyed driving the 850R around here. In Forza 4, this was a very good race car. I'm going to have to try and build me a race car version of this. I've tried before and it doesn't usually work out, so maybe I'll make a video on trying to turn the 850R into a race car. And finally today we have the Ford F-150 Raptor, 411 horsepower, 6,006 pounds. Yeah, this is a very heavy truck. Now, I've liked the Raptor ever since I saw this thing in Forza 4. I thought it was amazing, and I still really like the Raptor. I've decided to go with the standard F-150, the Shelby Raptor, and the new 2017 Raptor will both be going around in the coming weeks. But I went with this model because this is the one I fell in love with. First thing you'll notice is how silly it looks going around the Top Gear track. It just looks so mahoosive. It's unreal. This really is a very big vehicle. However, for a truck, I have to say this is a really good handling vehicle. Now, I have driven Raptors and so on in previous Forza titles, and they've always been very understeery stock. And even tuned up, they're not usually the best of cars. This one, however, was actually a really nice car to drive. There was a bit of understeer through Hammerhead. This thing was a bit of a bitch to get around. But other than that, I really had no problems with the Raptor. I thought this thing drove really, really well. Now, it isn't the fastest thing in the world. It may have 411 horsepower, which is a decent amount. Actually, it's the third least powerful car here today, if you want to laugh. However, it is by far the heaviest vehicle here today. So straight line speed isn't great, but the cornering is relatively decent on it, and I enjoyed my time in the F-150 Raptor and killed the cameraman. Anyway, on to the times, and the Koenigsegg Agera goes into third with a 112.593, missing out on the Zonda Sync, which is around the same class, although it does beat a Ford GT by a fair amount. I'm pretty impressed with that for the Agera, I've got to say. Moving down the board, the Jaguar F-Type goes into 36 with a 119.413, and the Aston Martin Vanquish goes into 37th with a 119.484. I was expecting the Vanquish to be the quicker out of them two, I've got to say, but it's not a bad time. It's around where it should be. You know, there's an AMG GTS, SLR McLaren, and Alfa 8C, and so on and so forth, so pretty decent. The Ferrari 575 goes into 46 with a 120.728. Which is pretty good. It beats a Ferrari F355 Berlinetta, Corvette C5, Dodge Challenger Hellcat, so pretty decent time overall. Also beats a brand new C63S. The Alfa 4C goes into 56 with a 122.737, just beating a Lexus RCF, which again, that's a damn good time for that car, to be honest with you, considering it had about half the power the RCF had. And then finally, the Volvo 850R goes into 97th with a 132.674, just had some issues getting the power down. And the Ford Raptor goes into 101 with a 135.209. We haven't had too many slower cars around, so yeah, that's why it's so low down on our board. But anyway, friends, that is going to be it for today. Now, I'm probably going to make a separate video discussing next week's theme, or at least what I want to try for next week's theme. So keep an eye out for that tomorrow. Anyway, friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching. My name's been The Real Emile. Until next time, farewell.